the next piece I want to talk about, which is really part of a larger installation, which is the storm. The images of it are from the studio now, so that is kind of broken up. That idea of atmosphere that we see in the scenery of this piece here, versus just like the almost absence of the atmosphere and focus on the characters, is really interesting. But I would like to talk about I don't know if if calling it the centerpiece of this installation is okay,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the panel in which we see the Capitol, it's definitely commentary on the insurrection of January 6th on the Capitol. Let's go into this piece. Let's talk about this for a second.
Sure. Um, so I really held off on what to do about the insurrection. In a weird way, I felt like I'd already dealt with a lot of this for most of last year, for most of the past 4 years. And I didn't really feel like I had any more moves left. I really didn't want to either. And it took me basically until arriving at Bard to like have this enough distance between myself and when it had actually happened to realize that there was a need to find some way to like restage this or reimagine this. So this whole thing is, I guess you would call it a work in progress or a direction. And in this centerpiece, the bottom here was the sort of jumping off point here. Um, and I was using this Marvel comic, or it's a sort of a relaunch of the Avengers from the mid 2000s, in which the writers were kind of imagining the Avengers for the Bush era and the War on Terror era, and using that as a way to critique the Bush era. So, for example, Captain America at one point does meet George Bush, and he becomes sort of like part of their foreign policy domestic agenda. And basically the Avengers are sort of shown, I think correctly, probably for the first time, as sort of like right-wing psychopaths. um and it's a very interesting and weird take on it. It's very much not the Marvel Disney cinematic version that we are at all accustomed to. There are elements that drip into the films and whatnot. um but anyways, the entire reason for Marvel, why Marvel at all? Well, the main thing was this one comic has a final battle that takes place with the Capitol in the background. So that was one thing, and then the other thing was in sort of sorting through all the images, in sorting through everything that came out of January 6th. It's I think an important window into the kind of culture, the kind of imagery that these people consume and consider part of their ideology. And I think it's important to note that a lot of it is just really bad Photoshop things of like Trump on a tank, Trump on a velociraptor. It's really bad takes on those variations of the same thing, with one exception: the Marvel stuff. There were people with like Captain America shields. There was one of the most jarring things was these people who had Civil War, hashtag Civil War printed on their t-shirts, which pointed to like, these people took the time, the care to print out these shirts, prepare them, hence the preparation for the hashtag Civil War. But also the font was lifted from the Captain America Civil War movie. So this sort of thing that breaks into the silo of the sort of siloed off world of like right wing conspiracies that we're just getting into and whatnot seems to be the Marvel stuff. And I couldn't get over that, the sense of them imagining themselves not just as like 1775 part 2, as like one of the signs said, or a second American Revolution or whatever, but as Avengers and whatnot. So that sort of was the jumping off point for staging them and thinking of them as both werewolves and Avengers.
Yeah, let's talk now about more where the werewolves are coming from, and how we've how you've come up with this composition, and what each one is kind of representing, I guess.
Sure. So the werewolves, very simply, are some kind of a symbol archetype that I'm still working through. But I've been thinking of the werewolf as the thing that you think you are not, but that you actually are. And that I don't think need can is sort of exclusive to this sort of negative political ideology that we feel like pulled through on the January 6th, but it's perhaps the best indicator of that, in that this there are violent, truly insurrectionary tendencies to that. It's sort of a thing that has been warned about, and um, all along, like that was the fear, that was the nightmare fully realized. Um, so just so starting with like the Hulk figure here in on the left, um, that's a perfect indicator of both the the werewolf and the sense of the a figure that just has lost its all of its control and whatnot. Um, and an important staging device as well was like, well, who was fighting it that day, and who was who how did I feel that day? What the emotions were obviously all very complicated and messy, but like in imagining the insurrectionists as avengers themselves, them seeing themselves as the superhero good guys, that put them in conflict with the police. And one of my sort of nightmarish tendencies, I guess, from or one of the sort of feelings that I had that day that just I couldn't really resolve, was that I was watching all this and didn't have anyone to root for, because per where we've been, per what I was saying in the last painting, like one isn't really going to root for the cops. You're rooting for the cops so that they don't murder Bernie Sanders. But we've been through this collectively together over the past year, about like understanding that police protect and serve does not mean what we think it does. Even that day, there was an understanding that a lot of these people were probably, the insurrectionists were probably in law enforcement. Um, so I was kind of melding some of my own cop imagery with some of the clan imagery. So this is really not heroes versus villains; it's villains versus villains in that sense.
Let's go into this character that's kind of up on the left, the red with the horns. I think that was also kind of part of the Marvel poster. It's
Hmm.
definitely looks like white figures maybe flailing themselves over the wall, and that this horned beast, perhaps even devil, is there, but it's also kind of protecting or like defending the capital in some way. It's like
Hmm.
not, again, not very clear, but right in the middle you have again this hovering presence with either lightning or like a net. It's, it's not necessarily so defined there, where it's like, again, maybe to your one of your points, you don't know what you're rooting for, you don't know what's being protected or what's being destroyed, or the motivations behind it. Can we talk a little bit about that character?
Sure. These horn characters are somewhat separate. I think this horn character, the one on the left, that cutout, that's actually just a direct lift from the Marvel comic that I was pulling from. There's like this, when all this chaos breaks loose, there's these werewolves that are wandering around. There's these deviled figures, and I was trying to find a way to evoke that. And I also put a Q symbol on his forehead. I've sort of hidden little Qs in and around. It was sort of a sort of a play of like that's actually what the title is derived from as well. The sort of prophecy of the QAnon conspiracy being fulfilled. That the storm being the so called, so imagined pedophile politicians and elites will all be executed and whatnot. So I was kind of trying to evoke some of that coming alive as well. And also, the horn guy is also a reference to the image from January 6th that I think sticks to people the most, is most recognizable from that day. And yeah, this was a weird conflagration of like trying to look at that comic whenever I was lost, but also trying to go back and look at those images from that day and trying to put things together from that and see which one felt a little bit more real. And I always kept coming back to the comic stuff being what felt real, because I mean, even now when I still see footage of January 6th on cable news or whatnot, there's not really a good sense of like the horror of it. It feels detached in a way. And I was kind of trying to go back into feeling that horror and somehow doing that through less sort of realist means. I feel like at least helped me like resettle into what that day felt like.